Mara Ellison's boots echoed softly against the cracked pavement as she approached the waxen gallery. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the worn cobblestones of the town's main street. The building loomed ahead, a grand yet somber structure, its stone facade worn by time but still imposing. The sign above the heavy oak door read simply, "Waxen Gallery." The letters faded and chipped, as if reluctant to reveal the secrets held within. She paused, pulling her jacket tighter against the chill that had settled in the air. A cold that seemed to seep into her bones. Mara's sharp eyes scanned the entrance and the small crowd clustered nearby locals, whose faces were etched with worry and whispered fears. She heard fragments of conversation carried on the wind, words like vanished, unnatural, and don't go in. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the promise of a story aching to be uncovered. Crossing the threshold, Mara was immediately struck by the oppressive stillness inside the gallery. The air was thick and cold, the faint scent of wax mingling with dust, and something more elusive, something that prickled at the back of her mind. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows that danced across the walls adorned with rows of wax figures. Each one was posed with exquisite detail, Victorian ladies in flowing gowns, soldiers frozen mid-march, children caught in innocent play. Yet there was a quality to them that unsettled her deeply. Their eyes, glassy and unblinking, seemed almost too real, as if they held secrets beneath their cold surfaces. Mara raised her camera, the shutters click, breaking the silence as she captured the figures from every angle. Her fingers trembled slightly, a mix of excitement and unease swirling within her. She moved cautiously, notebook in hand, jotting down impressions and observations. The figure's stillness was suffocating, an unnatural quiet that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. As she ventured deeper into the gallery, whispers from the townsfolk outside echoed faintly in her mind. Stories of visitors who had come to marvel at the waxworks but never returned. Names lost to time, faces that now seemed eerily familiar among the statues. Mara's heart tightened at the thought, a cold knot of dread settling in her stomach. She stopped before a particularly striking figure, a woman in a delicate lace dress, her porcelain face flawless but unnervingly lifelike. Mara studied the figure's eyes, noting the subtle veins and the faint sheen that mimicked real tears. For a moment, she could have sworn the figure's gaze shifted ever so slightly, a flicker of movement that vanished as abruptly as it appeared. She blinked, questioning her own senses. A sudden creak echoed through the silence, making Mara start. She spun around, but the gallery was empty save for the statues. The sound seemed to come from the far end of the hall, where shadows pooled thick and impenetrable. She swallowed hard, the air feeling heavier, pressing down on her chest. Determined not to succumb to fear, Mara pressed on, her footsteps steady despite the growing tension. She paused at a display case filled with letters and photographs, artifacts that hinted at the gallery's long and troubled history. The curator's name, Elias Voss, appeared repeatedly, linked to whispered tales of dark rituals and unholy pacts. Mara's mind raced with questions. Was it possible that these wax figures were more than mere art? That the vanished visitors were somehow entwined with the gallery's secrets? She snapped more photos, her hands shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and foreboding. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the gallery into shadows, Mara felt the weight of the stillness pressing in around her. The figures seemed to watch her now, their lifeless eyes following her every move. A suffocating silence wrapped around her, thick and unyielding, as if the very walls were holding their breath. She took a deep breath, fighting the creeping panic. This was just the beginning. Beneath the wax, Mara could feel the pulse of something dark and terrible, waiting to be uncovered. Her first night at the Waxen Gallery had only deepened the mystery on the dread. Yet, as she turned to leave, a faint whisper brushed against her ear, indistinct but chilling in its intimacy. Mara froze, heart hammering, before she finally stepped back into the cool night air. The gallery's shadow following her like a silent sentinel. The story was there, hidden beneath layers of wax and silence, and Mara was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. But as the door creaked shut behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had already stepped into a trap, one from which escape might prove impossible. The town's heart was a restless, whispering place that morning. The air thick with attention Mara could feel pressing at her chest as she stepped out of the modest inn and into the cobbled streets. The Waxen Gallery was a looming presence in the distance, its silhouette sharp against the pale sky, but the locals' eyes rarely turned toward it. Instead, they cast furtive glances, their voices low and hesitant whenever the museum's name slipped into conversation. Mara's first stop was the town's small cafe, a place where the scent of bitter coffee mixed with the faint aroma of baked bread and the undertone of whispered fears. She settled into a corner booth, her notebook open and pen poised, scanning the room for a potential source of information. An elderly woman caught her argus slight figure with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a worn handbag. Taking a breath, Mara approached gently. "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm writing a story about the Waxen Gallery. I was wondering if you might share anything you know." The woman hesitated, eyes flicking toward the window where the gallery's ominous shape stood distant and silent. "It's not a place for the living to linger," she whispered. "My nephew, he went there last month, hasn't been seen since. The whole town talks about it, but no one dares say it loud." Mara's pen scratched hurriedly across the paper as the woman recounted hushed rumors of vanished visitors, the air around them thickening with a palpable unease. Other patrons listened discreetly, their faces etched with worry and suspicion. Whispers tangled with the clinking of cups and the occasional sigh, weaving a tapestry of fear that Mara felt tighten around her. Later, she met Simon Hale at the local library, a sanctuary of quiet and dusty tomes. Simon, with his pragmatic demeanor and sharp intellect, was already poring over old newspaper clippings and town records. "Look at this," he said, pushing a yellowed article across the table. "The Waxen Gallery opened over 50 years ago, but there are mentions of strange ceremonies dating back even further, tied to the town's founding families." Mara leaned in, her eyes scanning the faded print that hinted at occult rituals and secret societies. The weight of history settled over her. The gallery was more than just a museum. It was a crypt of dark memories and whispered pacts. As the day wore on, Mara wandered through the town square, noting how groups of residents clustered in hushed conversations. Their faces were masks of anxiety, their voices dropping to conspiratorial tones when she approached. The gallery's shadow cast a long, cold darkness over the community, an unspoken menace that seemed to seep into their very souls. That night, back in her modest lodgings, the flickering candlelight threw long, dancing shadows on the walls. Simon spread out a rough timeline of the museum's history and its eerie connection to occult practices. If these rituals were meant to bind someone to the wax, it could explain the disappearances, he murmured. Mara's mind raced, the tendrils of paranoia coiling tighter as the silence of the night seemed to suffocate her thoughts. The Waxen Gallery was no ordinary museum. Beneath its cold, still surface lay a darkness waiting to be uncovered, and Mara was determined to peel back the layers, no matter the cost. She closed her notebook with a decisive snap, the sound loud in the quiet room. Tomorrow, she would begin her deeper investigation. The whispers were growing louder, and Mara could no longer ignore the chilling truth lurking just beyond the veneer of wax and shadows. The waxen gallery felt colder than before, as if the very air had thickened overnight, pressing down on Mara like a tangible weight. She paused beneath the flickering sconces that lined the high vaulted walls, her breath shallow and uneven. Her camera hung heavy in her hands, its lens trained on the newest display. A meticulously crafted wax figure of a man standing rigidly beside a vintage phonograph. At first glance, there was nothing unusual until Mara's eyes caught a subtle flicker in the figure's gaze. A slight shift in the curve of its mouth. She blinked rapidly, stepping closer, heart pounding. The figure's stony expression seemed to soften, as if a ghost of a smile haunted its lips. She raised her camera and snapped a photo, the flash momentarily illuminating the figure's pallid skin and glassy eyes. "It's just a trick of the light," Mara muttered to herself, but the knot in her stomach tightened. She reviewed the image on the small screen, zooming in carefully. The figure's eyes seemed clearer, more alive than before. She frowned, a chill creeping along her spine. Simon's voice echoed softly from the gallery entrance. "Mara, you all right?" She turned to see him approaching, his brow furrowed with concern. "Something's off," she whispered. Simon stepped beside her, glancing at the figure. Wax figures can look unnervingly lifelike, but they don't move. That's what makes this place creepy, not supernatural. "I thought so too, until now," Mara said, voice trembling. "Look at this." She showed him the photo. Simon's eyes narrowed, studying the image. "Is that supposed to be someone?" "Yes, I recognized him from the missing persons reports." They moved on cautiously, passing row after row of statues, each more detailed than the last. Mara's camera clicked repeatedly, documenting the gallery's silent occupants. Each photo told a more disturbing story, subtle changes in facial features, a shift in posture, a glimmer of recognition that shouldn't have been possible. The museum's stillness felt suffocating now, like a thick fog pressing against her lungs. Footsteps echoed faintly, though no one else seemed to be near. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision, and whispers of forgotten voices teased her ears. Mara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the camera settings, desperate to capture evidence. "It's like they're watching us," she whispered, eyes darting between figures that seemed frozen in time but somehow alive. Simon placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Let's keep focused. We need proof, not panic." But Mara's skepticism was eroding fast. The uncanny valley, the unsettling space between lifeless wax and living flesh, was no longer theoretical. It was a trap, tightening around her sanity. Hours slipped by, unnoticed, as Mara catalogued the shifting gallery. The wax figures' faces bore the marks of the missing townsfolk, their eyes hollow yet hauntingly familiar. A cold sweat broke across her brow as she realized the truth she couldn't yet fully accept. The museum was changing them, absorbing the vanished. In a moment of restless pacing, Mara found herself drawn to a statue near the grand staircase, a woman with eyes eerily like her own. The figure's fingers twitched, and Mara recoiled, breath hitching. She stumbled back, heart hammering, the oppressive silence broken only by her ragged breathing. Simon's voice was urgent now. "We need to get out of here. This place isn't safe." Mara resisted the urge. "No, I need to understand this. If these statues are connected to the disappearances, then this is where the truth lies." The oppressive atmosphere pressed heavier still, the air thick with the scent of melted wax and something else, something faintly metallic and bitter. Mara's mind raced. The gallery was no longer just a museum. It was a prison, a coffin of cold stone and waxen flesh. As she raised her camera once more, a sudden chill swept through the hall. The statues seemed to lean just a fraction closer, their glassy eyes glinting with malevolent intent. Mara's breath caught, the line between observer and participant blurring dangerously. Her rational mind screamed to flee, but her journalist's resolve anchored her in place. She whispered a vow to herself to uncover the dark heart beneath the wax, no matter the cost. Outside, the murmurs of the town's frightened whispers pressed in missing persons, lost souls, vanished without a trace. Inside, the wax figures waited, still and silent, their eerie realism deepening the nightmare. Mara's journey into the suffocating stillness had only just begun. The gallery's shadows lengthened as the evening deepened. And Mara knew one thing for certain: she was no longer alone among the waxen dead. And somewhere beneath their cold surfaces, something was watching her back. The morning haze had barely lifted when Mara and Simon arrived at the town's library, a quaint, aging building that smelled of must and forgotten memories. The windows, streaked with grime, filtered the weak sunlight into soft beams that danced over rows of ancient tomes and brittle newspapers. They settled at a heavy wooden table, cluttered with piles of documents and faded photographs relating to the waxen gallery's origins. Simon adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to a brittle ledger. The pages yellowed and fragile beneath his careful fingers. "Look here," he murmured, tracing a line of faded script. "The museum was founded over 70 years ago, but there are mentions of unusual gatherings, meetings that don't appear in official records." Mara frowned, her sharp eyes scanning the text. "Occult practices," she whispered, a chill creeping through her veins. The silence around them seemed to thicken, as if the walls themselves listened. Hours slipped by as they unearthed references to secret societies and rituals tied to the museum's earliest days. The founder, a man named Elias Vosnow, the curator, had been a sculptor of some renown. Yet whispers of his obsession with capturing life in wax seeped through the records. Mara's pulse quickened with a mix of fear and determination. Later that afternoon, Mara sat in a dimly lit cafe, its cracked windows fogged with the scent of stale coffee and damp wood. A woman approached cautiously, her eyes darting nervously before settling on Mara. It was Lydia Crow, a former employee of the museum, her thin frame trembling under the weight of unspoken fears. Sliding into the seat opposite Mara, Lydia lowered her voice to a whisper. "There are passages beneath the gallery," she said, producing a folded note. "Hidden doors, secret rooms, places the curator doesn't want anyone to find." Mara unfolded the note carefully. It contained cryptic sketches and directions, hinting at a labyrinth beneath the museum's polished floors. "Why are you telling me this?" Mara asked. Lydia's hands shook visibly. "Because I'm afraid. I've seen things. The curator's obsession isn't just about art. It's about control, about trapping souls in stillness. If you want to survive, you have to understand what's really going on down there." That evening, back at the museum, Mara, Simon, and Lydia ventured cautiously into the shadowed underbelly of the building. Simon's flashlight cut through the thick darkness, illuminating walls carved with strange symbols and eerie motifs that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. As they moved deeper, the atmosphere grew heavier, a suffocating pressure that pressed on their chests and muddled their thoughts. Lydia's whispered descriptions painted the curator as a man consumed by grief and madness, desperate to halt the inevitable decay of life through his dark rituals. Mara's heart pounded as she realized the full extent of the horror beneath the wax. The museum was no mere collection of figures, it was a prison, a tomb where the souls of the vanished were trapped in eternal stillness, and the curator's grip tightened with every secret they uncovered. Despite the growing dread, Mara's resolve hardened. She would follow these echoes of the past wherever they led, even if it meant confronting the darkness itself. The museum's secrets were unraveling, but the true nightmare was only just beginning. As they retreated from the hidden corridors, Mara glanced back at the silent wax figures that loomed like sentinels in the dim light, their glassy eyes reflecting a frozen eternity. The whispers of the past had spoken, and now the present demanded reckoning. Her investigation had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back from the shadows beneath the wax. The cold metal of the concealed panel pressed against Mara's palm was slick with a thin film of dust and something colder, almost clammy, that made her skin crawl. Lydia's trembling fingers guided her as they worked in near silence, the faintest scrape echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive stillness of the waxen gallery's upper hall. Mara's breath caught in her throat, a tight knot of anticipation and dread twisting deep inside her chest. This was it, the secret Lydia had hinted at, the passage that promised answers but threatened horrors. A soft click whispered through the silence as the panel swung open, revealing a narrow, shadowed corridor that slithered into darkness like a wound in the museum's heart. The air that exhaled from the gap was stale and cold, carrying the faint scent of mold and something metallic, like dried blood. Mara flicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the murk and revealing walls that seemed to pulse faintly with an unnatural sheen. The narrow passageway smelled of forgotten things, of silence long kept and secrets buried beneath layers of cold wax and dust. Lydia's eyes darted nervously toward the shadows, her hands trembling as she gripped Mara's arm. "This way," she whispered, voice cracking with fear and urgency. "The curator doesn't want anyone down here." Mara swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like the suffocating stillness that had haunted every corner of the gallery since her arrival. Steeling herself, she stepped forward, the floorboards creaking faintly beneath her boots. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening with every step, as though the passage itself was alive, breathing a slow, malevolent breath. As they moved deeper, the faint outlines of forgotten wax figures emerged from the shadow statues, so lifelike they seemed to flicker on the edge of animation. Mara's flashlight caught the glint of glassy eyes, some smeared with dust, others unnervingly clear, reflecting her light back with an eerie moisture. Her heart pounded fiercely as she noticed subtle changes, a finger that twitched, a head that tilted imperceptibly, a mouth that seemed to part as if to breathe. "Do you see that?" Lydia whispered, voice barely audible. "They're not just statues anymore, they move." A cold shiver ran down Mara's spine. The uncanny valley had deepened, twisting into something darker, something alive. The wax figure's stillness was dissolving, replaced by a slow, deliberate animation that defied reason and filled the cramped corridor with unspoken menace. The silence was broken only by the faintest whisper, a breathy sound that seemed to slither from the walls themselves. Mara strained her ears, but could not place its source. Was it the wind, a trick of the air, or something else entirely? Her skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes watching, waiting. Suddenly, a figure ahead shifted. Mara froze, breath caught in her throat. The hand of a wax mana figure once posed in eternal repose, slowly, fingers bending with an agonized deliberation. The movement was so slight, so deliberate, it felt like a nightmare made flesh. Panic surged through Mara's veins, her pulse thundering loudly in her ears. She stumbled back, nearly knocking into Lydia, who grasped her arm tightly. "We have to keep moving," Lydia hissed, eyes wide with terror. "He's watching, the curator." Mara nodded, swallowing down the rising tide of fear. The hidden corridors stretched out before them like a living tomb, suffused with the horror of endless stillness and the creeping dread of becoming trapped in a waxen prison. Every step echoed like a death knell. Every shadow seemed to twist into something sinister. The passage led them deeper into the bowels of the waxen gallery, revealing rooms filled with half-formed figures. Sculpted faces frozen in expressions of torment or ecstasy, their eyes glassy pools that seemed to shimmer in the gloom. The air was thick with the scent of melted wax and ancient secrets, suffocating in its heaviness. Mara's mind raced with questions and grim possibilities. What dark rituals had created this living gallery of horrors? How many souls had been stolen, frozen beneath layers of wax and silence? And most terrifying of all was she next. As they pressed onward, the atmosphere thickened, the oppressive stillness wrapping around them like a shroud. Mara's breath came in shallow gasps, her senses stretched taut as every sound, every flicker of movement, seemed magnified in the claustrophobic depths. Then, from the corner of her eye, Mara caught another twitcher wax figure's head slowly turned, eyes locking with hers in a glare so cold and lifeless it sent a jolt of pure terror crashing through her. She stumbled backward, heart hammering, voice catching in her throat. "We're not alone," she whispered, barely daring to breathe. The corridors seemed to pulse with unseen life as the wax figures shifted, inching closer with deliberate, terrifying animation. The boundary between the living and the inanimate blurred until it was impossible to tell. Where one ended and the other began, Mara knew then that the gallery was no mere museum of wax. It was a tomb, a prison, a cage for souls trapped beneath a suffocating veil of stillness and silence. And she was trapped within its grasp, the darkness pressing in from all sides. With Lydia's urgent whisper urging her forward, Mara steeled herself. There was no turning back now. The secret beneath the wax had been revealed, and with it, the nightmare had only just begun. The walls seemed to close tighter, the air growing heavier with dread as Mara pressed onward. Every step a descent deeper into the suffocating heart of the waxen gallery's dark secret. The figures watched, waited, and the silence screamed. And somewhere in the shadows, Elias Voss, the curator, smiled his pale, cruel smile, knowing his grip only tightened.